When you look at both the comics and the MCU, there's this one concept that kind of stands out as something that almost wasn't supposed to exist at all, and that's Antivenom. It's one of those strange creations that feels like it breaks the usual rules because it isn't just another symbiote, it's something different, something that came out of very specific circumstances. And now, there's a growing idea that this version of the symbiote might actually show up in Spider-Man Brand New Day. A lot of people already have theories about how that could happen, but it probably isn't going to be as simple as just introducing Venom the same way Sony did before. If Marvel has shown anything, it's that they don't usually take the most obvious path, even though that's sometimes what fans expect at first. The big idea here is that instead of bringing in a full version of Venom like the one played by Tom Hardy, the MCU might go in a different direction. The theory is that the leftover piece of the symbiote, the one that Eddie Brock unintentionally left behind, could evolve into Antivenom instead. And that change could happen when it bonds with someone new, and the most likely person for that is Peter Parker himself, played by Tom Holland. It sounds complicated at first because it mixes a bunch of different comic elements together, but when you really think about it, it actually fits the kind of storytelling Marvel likes to do. So it's worth breaking everything down because there are a bunch of clues that point toward this possibility. At first, a lot of people didn't believe the symbiote would even show up in Spider-Man Brand New Day. When the trailer dropped, there were small hints that made fans think Venom could be involved, but it didn't feel convincing right away. It seemed more likely that Marvel would hold off on something that big. But after watching the trailer multiple times, and after hearing more discussions and leaks online, it starts to feel like the symbiote really could play a role in the story. Not necessarily in the way people expect though, because it might not be a full Venom appearance. Instead, it could be the beginning of something that leads to Antivenom. One of the biggest reasons for this idea comes from how things were set up before. The post-credit scenes from Venom Let There Be Carnage and Spider-Man No Way Home didn't just exist for no reason. They clearly showed that a piece of the symbiote was left behind in the MCU, and that's not something Marvel usually ignores. If they went through the effort of connecting those universes, it wouldn't make much sense to just drop that storyline completely, so it feels like they're building towards something, even though they haven't revealed exactly what yet. Another important reason is simply what fans have been asking for. Tom Holland himself has talked about how he looked through fan reactions and opinions after the trailer came out, and he paid attention to what people actually wanted to see in the next Spider-Man movie. And when you think about it, one of the biggest requests has always been seeing Spider-Man interact with the symbiote. People have been waiting for that ever since it was teased, because it's such a major part of Spider-Man's story in the comics. So even though there are other popular ideas like Spider-Gwen or Miles Morales, the symbiote storyline is still right at the top for a lot of fans. At the same time, the movie doesn't seem to be going for a huge multiverse spectacle like the last one. Everything about Brand New Day suggests a more grounded approach, even though it still connects to bigger ideas in the background. And that's where Antivenom becomes interesting, because it allows Marvel to do something new while still using the symbiote concept. Instead of repeating the same Venom story again, they can twist it into something different, something that fits better with a more personal and grounded narrative. To understand why this works, it helps to look at how Antivenom was created in the comics. Unlike most symbiotes, which have their own personalities and influence their hosts in different ways, Antivenom is a bit more unusual. It doesn't behave like a typical symbiote, and that mostly comes from its origin. Eddie Brock, after losing the Venom symbiote, ends up trying to rebuild his life. He's dealing with serious problems, including cancer, which becomes a key part of the story, even though it wasn't always part of his character earlier on. During this time, Eddie starts working at a place called Feast, a shelter that helps people in need. This is where he meets Martin Lee, who is secretly Mr. Negative. Publicly, Martin Lee is seen as a kind and generous person, but he has a darker side with powers that are essentially the opposite of his normal self. And those powers are what lead to the creation of Antivenom, because when Martin Lee uses his abilities to heal Eddie's cancer, something unexpected happens. The traces of the Venom symbiote that were still inside Eddie react to that energy, and instead of disappearing, they transform into something new. That's how Antivenom is born, not as a separate alien creature, but as a kind of mutated version of the symbiote that already existed. And because of that, it behaves differently. It doesn't really have the same kind of personality or voice that Venom does, and it acts more like a force with a specific purpose. That purpose is healing, which sounds like a good thing at first. Antivenom can cure diseases, remove toxins, and even fix certain conditions that other characters can't. But the problem is that it doesn't always understand what actually needs to be fixed. For example, when it comes to Spider-Man, Antivenom sees his radioactive blood as something harmful, even though it's actually what gives him his powers. So it tries to heal him, which ends up putting Peter in danger instead of helping him. This idea of a character who thinks they're doing the right thing but ends up causing harm is what makes Antivenom so interesting. It isn't really a villain in the traditional sense, but it also isn't exactly a hero. It's somewhere in between, driven by a kind of logic that doesn't always match reality. And that's something Marvel could use really well in a movie, especially if they want a story that feels more grounded and character-focused. Now, if you bring this back to Spider-Man Brand New Day, there's a theory that the movie could combine multiple comic storylines into one. The trailer already hints at Peter going through some kind of physical or emotional change, possibly connected to his powers. There are even moments where his suit or eyes appear darker, which could suggest something is affecting him at a deeper level. So if Marvel wanted to explain that, they could introduce the symbiote as a temporary solution. In this version of the story, Peter might turn to someone like Bruce Banner for help, because he's one of the few people who understands what it's like to deal with a transformation that's hard to control. And if Banner tries to use the symbiote as a way to stabilize Peter's condition, it could lead to Peter bonding with it. That would give us a version of Spider-Man with the symbiote, even though it wouldn't be the traditional Venom storyline. But then, things could take another turn. If Mr. Negative is introduced, which has been rumored, his powers could interact with the symbiote in a similar way to the comics. That interaction could transform the symbiote into Antivenom, creating a completely new version of the character within the MCU. So instead of Eddie Brock becoming Antivenom, it could be Peter himself, or at least someone closely connected to him. Even though this might sound like a lot to fit into one movie, it actually lines up with Marvel's approach. From royal, high-level DCU and MCU breakdowns to the quieter rumors that don't always make headlines but often turn out to be true, we cover it all. Keep your eyes right here, because if you truly love cinema, this is the channel you need to be watching.